Hey, stop scrolling for a second, because what I'm about to tell you, nobody saw coming. Not the billionaire, not his fiancée, and definitely not the dozens of staff members who were standing right there when it happened. A 3-year-old little girl. Tiny hands, big brown eyes, arms crossed like she owned the entire mansion. And she looked straight up at a woman draped in a $1,000 gown, and said words that made a billionaire freeze in his own doorway. "You're not my boss, so keep your mouth shut." The whole hallway went silent. His fiancée's jaw dropped. The mop fell to the marble floor. And somewhere down the corridor, a mother's heart stopped beating for a full 3 seconds. But here's the part nobody talks about. What happened after those words changed every single life in that mansion forever. Stay with me. You need to hear this whole story. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to this channel, the place where real emotions live, where stories touch your soul, and where you always leave feeling something deep in your chest. I'm so glad you're here today. Seriously, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And hey, if you're new here, welcome to the family. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell because the stories we tell here, they're not just stories. They're mirrors of real life. Raw, honest, and unforgettable. Now, let me take you inside a mansion that looked perfect on the outside. But inside, it was holding secrets that were about to explode, because of the smallest, most unexpected person you could ever imagine. Not every beautiful home holds a happy life. Sometimes the grandest walls hide the deepest wounds. The Harrington estate sat at the top of Beacon Hill like a crown that nobody asked for. 42 rooms. Marble floors imported from Italy. Chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses. Gardens trimmed by hand every single morning before the sun fully rose. And a gate, tall black iron, that separated the world of the incredibly wealthy from everyone else. Inside that gate, life moved on a very specific schedule. Breakfast at 7, meetings at 9, dinner at 8. Every single day. No exceptions. No room for chaos. No room for noise. And absolutely, no room for surprises. That was the world of Ethan Harrington. 34 years old. Self-made billionaire. The kind of man who walked into a room and the air itself seemed to straighten up. Tall, always dressed in perfectly tailored suits. Today, a bright ivory one that practically glowed under the chandelier light. He had blue eyes that could look kind when he smiled and terrifying when he didn't. He had built his empire from almost nothing. A boy from a modest family who clawed his way to the top through sheer will, ruthless intelligence, and a hunger that never seemed to satisfy itself. People admired him. Some feared him. Most simply watched him from a distance and wondered what it felt like to live inside that kind of power. But Ethan Harrington had one weakness. One soft spot in all that armor. He just hadn't realized it yet. His fiancée, Victoria Calloway, had moved into the estate 3 months ago. 29 years old, English-born, with a sharp accent and even sharper eyes. She was stunning, the kind of beautiful that photographers chased and artists tried to paint. Her dark hair was always pinned perfectly. Her gowns, today a striking deep sapphire blue that swept the floor when she walked, always looked like they belonged on a runway, not a hallway. Victoria had met Ethan at a London gala 2 years ago. They dated long distance. Then she moved to America. And 6 months later he proposed on the rooftop of his New York penthouse with a ring that had its own Wikipedia page. The tabloids called them the perfect couple. The staff called them something else. But never out loud. Never where anyone could hear. Because Victoria had rules. Her rules. And those rules applied to every single person inside those gates, whether Ethan had hired them or not. Then there was Maria Santos, 31 years old, quiet, hard-working. She had been a housekeeper at the Harrington estate for 4 years, long before Victoria ever walked through those iron gates. She came every morning at 6:30, before the rest of the world woke up. She cleaned without being asked twice. She stayed late without complaint. She kept her eyes down and her mouth shut and did her job with a kind of dignity that doesn't need applause. Maria had one child, Lily, 3 years old, brown skin warm like copper, curly black hair that bounced when she ran, eyes so big and honest they could make a grown man feel guilty just by looking at him. She wore a bright yellow dress most days, her favorite, like a little sunflower that somehow ended up inside a house full of shadows. Maria had no choice but to bring Lily on certain days. Her babysitter had recently quit. Her sister lived across the city. Daycare was full, and she couldn't afford to miss a single shift. Ethan had never minded. He barely noticed Lily truthfully. She was quiet, small, tucked away in the corner of whatever room her mother worked in, usually drawing on paper or talking softly to a stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere. But Victoria minded. Victoria minded very much. And on this particular Tuesday morning, everything that had been quietly building beneath the surface of that perfect polished world was about to crack wide open. What would you do if the place you worked suddenly felt less safe? Not because of the work, but because of one person's cruelty. Have you ever watched someone treat a good person badly and felt powerless to say anything? Because that's exactly where Maria was. Every single day. Powerless. Until her 3-year-old daughter decided she wasn't going to be. Some people wear kindness like a costume. They put it on when the right people are watching, and take it off the moment they're gone. Started small. Like most damage does. The first time Victoria spoke sharply to Maria, Ethan wasn't home. He was in a board meeting across the city, his phone on silent, his mind buried in quarterly numbers and acquisition strategies. Victoria had walked into the east sitting room and found a single picture frame slightly crooked on the wall. Not broken, not missing, just tilted. 2 centimeters, maybe. She had called Maria in, pointed at it and said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "If I have to notice this, you're not doing your job." Maria had straightened the frame, apologized softly, and gone back to work. That was 3 months ago. Since then, the small moments had grown. A dish not dried to Victoria's satisfaction. Curtain not drawn at the exact right angle. A floor mopped but still showing a faint streak near the window that only Victoria seemed able to see. Each time the words got a little sharper, the tone a little colder, the look a little more pointed, the kind of look that says you are beneath me without ever having to use those exact words. The staff had noticed. Anna, the cook, would exchange glances with Thomas, the groundskeeper, when they heard Victoria's voice rise in a hallway. Nobody said anything. Nobody wanted to lose their position. And Maria just kept working. Kept her head down. Kept her apologies quick and her reactions invisible. 'Cause she needed this job. Desperately. Lily's medical checkups weren't free. The apartment rent wasn't free. The groceries, the bus fare, the small stuffed rabbit she'd bought Lily for her birthday last month. None of it was free. And jobs like this, steady with fair pay, didn't fall from the sky. So Maria swallowed it. Every sharp word. Every cold glance. Every moment of humiliation. She swallowed it down like bitter medicine and kept moving. But this Tuesday morning felt different from the moment it started. Victoria had woken up in a particular mood. The kind that seemed to have no reason and needed no invitation. She had found fault with the breakfast temperature. She had sent back a flower arrangement in the foyer because one stem was the wrong shade of pink. She had walked through 3 rooms trailing her finger along surfaces, looking for dust that wasn't there. The staff had moved more carefully than usual, whispers shorter, steps lighter, everyone bracing for something they couldn't name. Maria had arrived at 6:30 as always, Lily in tow, yellow dress bright as a small flame, stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Maria had set Lily up in the small supply room off the east hallway with her drawing paper and crayons. She'd kissed her daughter's forehead, whispered, "Stay here, baby. Be quiet. Mama's working," and gone to start on the upper floor hallways. By 10 o'clock, she'd worked her way down to the grand hall, the long, wide corridor that connected the main staircase to the entrance foyer. High ceilings, tall windows flooding the space with morning light, and floors, white marble floors that needed mopping every single day because every single footstep showed. She was almost finished. The bucket was nearly empty. She was wringing out the mop for the final pass when she heard the click of heels coming down the staircase. Victoria, a fire gown, hair pinned, eyes already scanning the hall like a soldier looking for enemy territory. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, stared at the floor, then stared at Maria. "You've left streaks," she said. No greeting, no good morning. Maria looked at the floor. She couldn't see any streaks. The marble was clean and bright under the morning sun. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll go over it again," she said softly. "You've been going over it again for 4 years," Victoria said, her English accent sharp as glass. "And yet here we are. Streaks." She walked forward, reached out, and took the mop handle directly from Maria's hands. Not asking, just taking. Then she held it out, horizontally like an offering, but her expression made it feel like something else entirely, like a command wrapped in contempt. "Do it properly this time. From the beginning. The whole floor. The whole floor." Again. That Maria had already cleaned twice. Maria reached for the mop, but a small voice beat her to it. "No." Both women froze. Standing in the doorway of the east hallway, tiny, barefoot, yellow dress bright against the white marble, was Lily. She had wandered out from the supply room. Her stuffed rabbit was gone. Her curly hair was wild, and her small brown arms were crossed over her chest with an authority that seemed to belong to someone 3 times her age and height. She stared directly at Victoria. Her big eyes didn't blink. Have you ever seen a child do something so brave it made your chest ache? Have you ever wished you had even half the courage of someone who hasn't yet learned to be afraid? Because what Lily did next, nobody in that hallway, not Maria, not Victoria, not even the universe itself, was prepared for. Children don't know the rules of silence that the world teaches adults. And sometimes, that is exactly the kind of power that changes everything. The hallway was completely still. Even the light coming through the tall windows seemed to pause. Victoria blinked. Once. She looked down at the small figure standing in the doorway. This tiny child in a yellow dress, arms crossed, expression utterly serious, and her face cycled through 3 emotions in 3 seconds. Surprise. Amusement. Then something cold. "Excuse me," she said. The words came out slowly, like she was deciding how seriously to take a bug that had just spoken. Lily didn't move, didn't uncross her arms, didn't look away. She took 1 step forward on the marble floor, small bare feet making the softest sound, and she said it again. Clearly, carefully, like she had been thinking about it for a long time. "You're not my boss." She tilted her chin up. "So keep your mouth shut." The air left the hallway. Maria's hand flew to her own mouth. Her eyes went wide with a terror that every working parent knows. That specific panic when your child does something that could cost you everything. "Lily," she whispered, her voice barely making sound. But Lily wasn't finished. She uncrossed her arms long enough to point, one small finger aimed directly at the mop still extended in Victoria's hands. "Mama already cleaned the floor. I watched her. She cleaned it 2 times. You're just being mean." If the first 2 sentences had knocked the air out of the room, this one reached in and rearranged the furniture. Victoria's jaw tightened. Her knuckles went white around the mop handle. The amusement that had briefly flickered across her face was gone, completely gone, replaced by something dangerous and cold. She took 1 step toward Lily. "Little girl," she said, her voice low and precise. "I don't know who taught you to speak to adults that way." "My mama taught me to tell the truth," Lily said. She didn't step back. Not even half a step. "And the truth is you're always mean to her and she cries in the car." The silence that followed was the loudest thing anyone in that hallway had ever heard. Because Maria did cry in the car. On the drive home. When she thought Lily was asleep in the back seat, wrapped in her little cardigan, stuffed rabbit in her arms. Maria would wait until she was 2 blocks from the estate, and then she would let herself cry. Quietly, quickly. Just enough to let the pressure out before she had to be strong again. She had never known Lily was awake. She had never known Lily had heard. She had never known that a 3-year-old had been storing all of that, every tear, every tension, every muffled sob, in her small heart. Carrying it. Waiting, in whatever way 3-year-olds wait, for a moment to speak it. And she had chosen this moment. This marble hallway. This blue-gowned woman. This mop. Maria's eyes filled with tears she could not let fall. What would it feel like to discover that someone you love, someone you tried to protect, had been quietly carrying your pain this entire time? That they saw everything you thought you hid. And then, from the doorway at the far end of the hall, came the sound of a single footstep. Everyone looked. Standing at the entrance to his bedroom, halfway out the door, suit jacket not fully on, expression frozen in complete and total shock, was Ethan Harrington. He had come home early. He had been standing there long enough to hear everything. And his face, that face that boardrooms feared, that face that never showed weakness, was doing something nobody had ever seen it do before. It was crumbling. The most powerful people in the world are not always the ones in the largest offices. Sometimes they're the ones who have simply been watching and waiting to understand what truly matters. Nobody moved. The tableau held, Victoria at one end of the hall, mop in hand, face carved from cold marble. Maria in the middle, one hand still pressed to her mouth, tears balanced on the edge of falling. Lily at the doorway, small and steady and impossibly brave. And Ethan, standing at the other end, blue eyes moving slowly from face to face. The moment stretched like pulled thread, thin, tense, about to snap. Then he walked forward. His footsteps were quiet on the marble. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He moved with the measured calm of someone who was thinking very hard and feeling even harder. He stopped a few feet away from Lily. He crouched down. Right there in his bright suit, on his marble floor, in his grand hallway. He folded himself down until he was at her eye level, and he looked at her. Lily looked back at him. She hadn't seen much of the man who owned this house. He was tall and quiet and usually gone. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't really afraid of anyone, as it turned out. But she watched him with those big, serious eyes, trying to take his measure the way children do. Honestly, without the filters adults use. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice was quiet, careful. "Lily," she said. "Lily," he repeated. He nodded slowly. "That's a good name." He paused. "Did you mean what you said just now?" Lily didn't hesitate. Yes. That your mama cries in the car. The tiniest flicker of something crossed Lily's face. Not doubt, but maybe the first awareness that what she'd said had weight, had landed somewhere important. She glanced at her mother. Maria's expression was anguished. Not angry, just scared in the way that love makes people scared. Lily looked back at Ethan. She thinks I'm sleeping, Lily said quietly. But I'm not always sleeping. Ethan closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, he stood up. Slowly. He straightened his suit jacket. He turned to look at Victoria. She met his gaze with the practiced composure of someone who had survived many difficult conversations. Her chin lifted. Her expression said, "This is being handled absurdly. Child made a scene. Let's move on." But Ethan's expression said something entirely different. "Victoria," he said, quietly. Just her name. "Ethan, she's a child who wandered out and—" "How long?" She blinked. "I beg your pardon. How long has this been happening?" His voice was still quiet, still controlled. But underneath it, underneath the carefully maintained surface, something was shifting. Something large and heavy, like a glacier deciding to move. "Because I've been standing there for 3 minutes. And in 3 minutes I saw enough to understand that what that little girl just described didn't happen once. It happened enough times that a 3-year-old felt the need to say something about it." Victoria set the mop down, leaned it against the wall with a precise, deliberate motion, as though even now she could manage optics. "I have standards for how this house is run," she said crisply. "If the staff can't meet—" "Maria!" He turned to face her. And something in his voice when he said her name, just those 5 letters, made Maria's carefully held composure begin to unravel. "How long have you worked here?" "4 years, sir," she whispered. 4 years. He nodded. "And in 4 years before 3 months ago, did you ever have a problem? Was there ever a complaint about your work?" Maria shook her head silently. "Ethan." Victoria's voice had an edge now. "I'm not speaking to you right now," he said. Not unkindly, but with a finality that closed a door. He looked at Maria again. Really looked at her. Perhaps for the first time in 4 years. Saw the tiredness around her eyes. Saw the invisible weight she was carrying in her shoulders. Saw the way she was positioned, slightly turned, slightly smaller than her actual height, the posture of someone who had been making themselves smaller for a long time. And something in Ethan Harrington, something that had been asleep for years, buried under quarterly reports and acquisition targets and the performance of being powerful, woke up. "I owe you an apology," he said. Maria looked startled, as though those words were in a language she hadn't expected to hear. "I hired you. This is my home. And I was not paying attention to what was happening in it." He paused. "That's on me. Have you ever had someone in authority actually stop, actually look at you, and take responsibility for something painful you experienced? Do you know how rare that is? Do you know what it does to a person who has been invisible for so long?" Maria's tears fell then. She couldn't stop them. They came quickly and silently, dropping onto the marble floor she had cleaned twice that morning. And Lily, small, certain yellow dress glowing in the morning light, walked quietly across the floor, took her mother's hand in both of her tiny ones and held it. That was the image that cracked Ethan Harrington completely open. A 3-year-old, holding her mother's hand, standing in the middle of a mansion that had forgotten how to be a home. But this moment was only the surface. Because what nobody in that hallway knew yet, what even Maria herself didn't know, was the truth that was about to surface about who Lily really was. And when it came out, nothing would ever be the same. Some truths don't announce themselves. They wait. quietly, patiently, until the exact right moment, and then they changed the shape of everything. Victoria left the hallway. She walked upstairs without another word, heels precise on the marble steps, posture impeccable, the blue gown trailing behind her like a retreating tide. The door to the master suite clicked shut with a sound that felt, to everyone below, like a verdict being sealed. Ethan watched her go. He stood very still for a long moment. Then he looked at Maria and Lily, still hand in hand, still standing together on the clean marble floor, and something in his expression was no longer the face of a billionaire. It was just the face of a man. Tired, uncertain, maybe a little ashamed. "Come," he said simply. "Let's sit down." He led them to the small sitting room off the main hall. Not the grand formal drawing room, but the smaller one, the one with the worn reading chair by the window that nobody used because it wasn't impressive enough to show guests. He'd bought that chair 12 years ago, before the money, before the estate. It was the only piece of furniture in the entire mansion that had belonged to his previous life. He'd kept it without ever quite knowing why. He sat across from Maria. Lily climbed up onto the settee beside her mother and leaned against her arm like a small, warm anchor. Ethan looked at the little girl. "You're very brave," he said. Lily considered him. "Mama says brave means scared, but you do it anyway." "Your mama's right," he said. Then he looked at Maria. "I want to know, honestly, what's been happening. Not what you think I want to hear. What's actually been happening?" Maria was quiet for a long moment. Old instincts fought against the sudden, unexpected space of being asked. Being genuinely asked. And then, slowly, carefully, like someone opening a door they've kept locked for a very long time, she began to talk. She told him about the first incident. Picture frame. She told him about the dishes, the curtains, the floors that were never clean enough. She told him about the comments that came daily now, that had started small and grown into something she dreaded walking into each morning. She told him about the other staff members. Good, hard-working people who had begun to look for other positions because the atmosphere had become unbearable. She did not exaggerate. She did not perform. She simply told the truth, quietly, looking at her hands. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you say anything to me?" he asked. Not accusatory. Genuinely confused. "Because you're engaged to her," Maria said simply. "And I need this job." The plainness of that answer hit him harder than any dramatized response could have. "I need this job." For words that contained an entire world. An apartment, a child's medical care, groceries, bus fare, a stuffed rabbit. For words that explained why good people stay silent when they shouldn't have to. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Maria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She looked up. "What's Lily's father's name?" The room stilled. Maria's face changed. It was subtle. A tightening around the eyes, a flicker of something old and carefully managed passing through her expression. "Why do you ask that?" she said. Her voice was still steady, but her hand tightened slightly around Lily's. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a photograph. Small, slightly worn at the corners, the kind you keep in a wallet for years. He held it out. Maria looked at it. The color drained from her face. The photograph showed a younger Ethan, maybe 22, 23, standing with his arm around a young woman at what looked like a company event. The woman was laughing. Dark hair, brown skin, a warmth in her expression that made the camera seem like it loved her. The woman was Maria, 4 years younger. Before the tired eyes. Before the careful posture. Before the invisible weight. "Maria, I didn't recognize you at first," Ethan said quietly. When you came for the job interview 4 years ago, you'd changed your hair. You were different, quieter. And I was different too. Too caught up in building everything to look at faces the way I used to. He paused. But I found this last week, going through old boxes. And I've been trying to figure out how to say this for 7 days. He looked at Lily. Lily, who had his exact shade of blue eyes. Something nobody had commented on because nobody was looking. Because why would anyone look at a maid's daughter and think to compare her eyes to the billionaire's? She has my eyes, he said softly. Maria said nothing. Maria. His voice was barely above a whisper. Is Lily mine? Have you ever held a secret so long it became part of your bones? Have you ever made a choice to protect someone, and never been sure if it was the right one? The silence in that small sitting room lasted 10 full seconds. And then Maria, composed, quiet, hard-working Maria who had swallowed sharp words for 3 months and tears for 3 years, closed her eyes, and said, "Yes. The truth doesn't destroy everything it touches. Sometimes, only sometimes, it builds something better than what stood before." The word hung in the room like light through a window, illuminating everything it fell on, changing the way the familiar looked. Ethan sat with it. He didn't speak for a long moment. His jaw was tight. His eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with anger. He looked at Lily, who was looking back at him with the same direct, honest gaze she'd aimed at Victoria in the hallway, and something moved across his face that had no name in the language of boardrooms and acquisition meetings. Something ancient and undeniable. "Tell me," he finally said. His voice was rough at the edges. "Tell me from the beginning." And Maria did. 4 years ago, she had been a junior events coordinator at a company that had hired Ethan's firm for a partnership launch. They had met at that event, the one in the photograph. Connected in the way that sometimes happens unexpectedly, between two people who weren't looking for it. Had lasted 3 weeks. Then Ethan's world had accelerated. A major merger, a relocation to the West Coast, a year of being swallowed entirely by the machine of building an empire. He hadn't called. She hadn't chased. And 2 months after it ended, quietly without ceremony, Maria had found out she was pregnant. She had thought about reaching out. She had picked up her phone 100 times. But by then Ethan Harrington was on the cover of business magazines. He had bodyguards and PR teams and a life that moved at the speed of a different planet. She was 27, alone and terrified. She had made a decision she thought was protecting everyone. She would raise Lily herself. She wouldn't disrupt a life that had moved so far beyond her. She would be enough. And she had been. She was enough. Every single day. But when she'd needed work, when the savings ran dry and Lily was 8 months old and the bills had their own kind of gravity, she had seen the listing for a housekeeper position at the Harrington estate, and she had told herself it was just proximity, just practicality. That she could keep her head down. That he would never notice. That she could be invisible. And she had been invisible. Until Lily decided she was done with invisibility. Ethan listened to all of it without moving. When Maria finished, the sitting room held the particular quiet of a space where something important has just been placed down after being carried for a very long time. He stood up, walked to the window, stood with his back to them for a long moment, looking out at the garden that was trimmed every morning before sunrise by a man who needed his wages to matter. Then he turned around. "I have missed 3 years," he said. His voice was steady but his eyes were not. 3 years of her life. And I didn't even know I was missing them. He looked at Lily. "I don't know how to fix that. I don't know if it can be fixed." Lily slid off the settee. She walked across the room on her small bare feet and stopped in front of him, She looked up. You crouched down, she said. In the hallway. You got small so you could see me. He nodded. Most grown-ups don't do that, she said matter-of-factly. He crouched down again. Right there by the window. I should have been doing it all along. Lily studied him for a moment with those blue eyes. His blue eyes, looking back at him from a face that was entirely her own. Then she held out her hand. Not a hug. Not a declaration. Just a hand. Beginning. Ethan Harrington, who had built a company from nothing, who had never cried in a board meeting, who had kept every wall intact for 34 years, took his daughter's hand. And the last wall came down. What happened after that was not a fairy tale. Life rarely is. Victoria and Ethan ended the engagement 2 weeks later. Not in screaming or drama. In a quiet, honest conversation where two people acknowledged that what they had built together was more surface than substance. She returned to London. She seemed, in her own way, relieved. Perhaps the house had never truly felt like home to her either. Maria was offered a new position, not as a housekeeper, but as estate manager, overseeing the staff and the running of the property with the authority and compensation that reflected 4 years of doing exactly that work invisibly. She accepted after thinking about it for 3 days, because she was careful with decisions that mattered. Lily got her own room in the estate. She chose yellow curtains. And Ethan Harrington learned, slowly, imperfectly, the way all important things are learned. How to be present. How to crouch down. How to see the people in the room he'd been too busy to notice. He learned it from a 3-year-old in a yellow dress who hadn't yet learned that the world expected her to be quiet. He hoped she never did. Here is the lesson this story leaves behind. Not printed on a motivational poster, but lived in a marble hallway by a small girl with crossed arms. Power doesn't always look like a suit or a gown or a gate made of iron. Sometimes it looks like a 3-year-old who loves her mother enough to be terrified and speak anyway. And invisibility is something the world assigns to people. It is never something they deserve. The people who work quietly, who keep their heads down, who swallow the bitter parts of their days to protect the people they love, they are not invisible because they are small. They are invisible because the rest of us forgot to look. Don't forget to look. And here's the question I want to leave with you today. The one I hope stays with you past this video, past this evening, into the quiet moments before you sleep. Who in your life is crying in the car on the way home, and hoping you haven't noticed? If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of someone or made you feel something real, please hit that like button. Takes 1 second and it tells me these stories matter to you. Drop a comment and tell me, what was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? I read every single one. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe right now and ring that bell, because we release new stories every week. And every single one is crafted to make you feel, think, and remember what truly matters. And if you're hungry for more, watch the next story already waiting for you on screen. I promise it's worth your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care of each other.